Guten Vormittag. Ich habe heute die Ehre, euch die nächsten Speaker vorzustellen. Mein Name ist Magnus, ich bin der Brand Ambassador für Hipsters in Deutschland und bin mega happy, dass ich es heute geschafft habe, oder wir zusammen mit der DBU hier auf der Education Stage Jared Brown und Anistatia Miller zu begrüßen zu dürfen. Also ich wünsche euch ganz, ganz viel Spaß bei Most Noble Water. Es gibt ganz viele neue Insights. Die Gin-Geschichte wird einmal wieder auf links gedreht, also seid gespannt. Und im Nachgang ist auch die Möglichkeit, nochmal Q&A zu machen. Da komme ich dann zu euch mit dem Mikrofon. Und wir haben heute Abend auch eine Veranstaltung in der Küchebar. Wer da Interesse dran hat, kann um 17:30 Uhr vorne vor der Halle haben wir einen Shuttlebus eingerichtet, mit dem ihr dort direkt hinkommt, und um 18:30 Uhr auch. Da könnt ihr aber auch nachher auf mich zukommen, dann habe ich einen QR-Code, wo ihr alle Informationen findet. Der Shuttlebus fährt auch zu verschiedenen anderen Partys heute, also vielleicht eine schöne Alternative zum Taxi. Und es gibt auch leckere Drinks da drin. Also, ich wünsche euch jetzt ganz, ganz viel Spaß bei Most Noble Water mit Anistatia Miller und Jared Brown. Viel Spaß!
Thank you so much, Magnus.
Yeah, I've got the microphone. Hello! Ah, you're all there. Okay.
You know what we don't have?
What?
We don't have the remote.
Uh-oh. Who's
I just
holding
looked
the
down
remote?
and I think this is a good slide, but
Where
there's
did
more.
they see this slide?
Oh, thanks so
there
much.
we go. Okay. There we go. Come on. Come on. Come on. I don't trust you. I don't trust you. Okay. No, you know them. Okay.
So how did we get started in this research? It was by accident. In 1995, we were travel writers in British Columbia, and a friend said, "Hey, do you know this internet? I think it's going to be big. You've got to get on it, build a website." She looked at me and said, "What are we going to build a website on?" I was holding 2 martinis. We put up a martini website. It exploded. Those were the days when you could actually crash your service provider. And we did 4 times in the first month. In 6 months, a New York publisher emailed and said, "Please, can we turn this into a book?" And Shaken Not Stirred came out and became the world's best-selling book on the martini.
Only one problem. Everything that's in that book about gin is wrong.
It was the information available to us at the time.
Yeah, well, what can you say?
But
That's why it's taken us almost 20 some odd years to fix it. And almost 30 years, isn't it? Almost 30 years to fix what we know. So, it comes down to how did it happen? I spent the past 7 years earning 2 master's degrees and a doctorate in early modern English brewing and distillation. And that means not reading everybody's newspaper articles or looking at Google or looking at Wikipedia, but it's going into places like this and actually unroll. This is not a stock photo. This is a pile of what I actually read. So, and you had to learn how to read it too. That's beside the point. This is what I learned. Gin's parent was not Dutch. She was German.
she.
She.
Can you explain?
Well, yes, of course, but let's start off simple. Let's talk about what everybody knows. Everybody knows English soldiers got their first taste of Dutch courage during the 30 Years' War, right?
You can forget that story now. It was actually taken from English writer Daniel Defoe.
And he said brandy, not Geneva. Sorry.
So how did that story come about? 1804, Thomas Trotter, an American writer, made it up. It didn't exist before 1804, and there was no facts to support it.
And he was a prohibitionist. He wanted to get people to stop drinking altogether. Another favorite fable, even we put this in the 1990s. Gin was invented by Franciscus Sylvius Dillebeau in Leiden, Netherlands.
Why is this one not possible?
Ready? In 1606, the Dutch States General levied taxes on all distilled wine and Genever and fennel waters when sold as a beverage instead of medicine. That was 8 years before the man was born.
Yeah, 1614, 1606.
Well,
There goes that one.
there goes that one down the hole.
Next.
Happens a lot. And what were they really
Yeah, so we did find that King William of Orange's physician wrote a book about the gardens of the palace at Luz. The most boring book I've ever read, except for chapter 8, which was all about the food and drink of that time. And he discovered they were drinking a nauseous French wine made palatable with the addition of wormwood.
Mean vermouth?
Yes.
Yeah, well, okay, so they were drinking vermouth.
I've spent years trying to find any evidence that they combined it with Geneva. It would have set the martini history back a few centuries, but
Hey, you can't have everything. Can't have everything. Now there's another claim. Please excuse me if anybody represents something. There are claims that the Bowles Distillery first commercially produced and exported Geneva on a small scale in 1575 to England. Except there's one little minor problem. There was another recipe from Germany, and that was from the 1400s. And it was German alchemists and old women who were called water burners distilled grain-based spirits. They were taking stale beer and adding botanicals to it, and that's what they were, because it was a good economy. Women were distilling a lot.
What about this picture?
Oh yes, the picture actually is the front cover of Michael Pufranschuck's first book on distillation. He was addressing this to female distillers, not the brandy makers who were men, who were also obviously distilling, but to another group of people who were using economics of using beer to make spirits. I know I did. Well, there you go, I do that, so do you. But my favorite is because men were using wine base and making Waldgolder Bierwasser, but the wives with beer were making Kramach Bierwasser. So you can find both recipes in the same book. Think about it. Think about it. Now, this book, written in 1456, was finally published in 1476. The fascination is it didn't get as far as another book did by Hieronymus Rundschwig. That one had 38 editions and also contained a juniper spirit.
It's interesting to note at this time in history, the printing press had only been around for about 50 years. In that time, there were more books printed containing distillation formulas than copies of the Bible. Oops, priorities.
Priorities. Think about this one.
But also interesting, we found this image used as the cover of a Japanese book on distillation and mixed drinks from the 1950s.
Yeah. I don't know how this one's gotten around, the rest of us never seen it before. Okay, but what it comes down to is, here's the missing link. In 1527, English author Lawrence Andrew translated Rundschwig's book into English and published it in London under the title, here we go, The Virtuous Book of Distillation of the Waters of All Manner of Herbs, which included a juniper berry spirit.
Oh, can I kill one other myth?
Go ahead.
University of Salerno, 1100s. There is evidence they were working with juniper in distillation. There is no evidence that that information made it out of Salerno before the 20th century.
See, this is the important point. There is one book that brought it all together, from Germany straight to England, straight into the hands of women who were distilling at home in these adorable little conical things. And this is actually an illustration from a 1500s book from England. So from Germany, women using the same sort of skill, English women started doing the same thing.
But this continued in England in books such as Hugh Platt's 1602, Delights for Ladies, a housekeeping manual.
Yeah, and they kept on going.
And yet that housekeeping manual was distillation formulas.
What can you say? But let's go on to the fancy version. You have to thank Henry VIII and his daughter for actually switching from wine drinking to spirits drinking back in the 1500s, not in the 1600s. What Henry liked was something called aquaviti. What we did not know at the time is speaking, was a botanical-led spirit. So you had more than one botanical in this. Same thing with Aqua Rosa Solis. If you've had Italicus, you have had Aqua Rosa Solis. It's another multiple botanical spirit.
You had a hand in that one, in Italicus.
No.
We were touring with Giuseppe Gallo for Martini years ago. She would talk about this Rosolio, and he was fascinated. He finally said, "Do you have recipes?"
Of course, but that's what happens all the time. Now, here's another royal problem, or royal opportunity. King James and his wife, Queen Anne of Denmark. She came from a court, royal court, that drank spirits, not wine, not beer, they drank spirits. She brought that to England, so on top of people already making this stuff, it then became cool. So, conspicuous consumption. Ooh, that's what the royals drink. Okay, maybe we should start making it and drinking it too. It all of a sudden became something non-medicinal, but very social, regardless of economic status.
Can we drop back one for 1 second?
Why?
Horse brew.
Quick.
Okay. Elizabeth I, you've all probably seen and used the Japanese bar spoon, spoon on one end, fork on the other. It's been Japanese for about 100 years. It was German from the 1200s. It made it to England very conspicuously with Queen Elizabeth I in a dessert called souquette, which was fruit cooked in syrup. So you use the
Suck it.
souquette.
Suck it.
That sounds a bit rude.
Suck it. I'm sorry, it was called suck it. Yeah. Okay, never mind.
Anyway,
Yes.
fruit cooked in syrup. The spoon to eat the syrup, the fork to eat the fruit. But before that, if this spoon fork was carried by any German who was traveling.
You done that?
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, good. Okay. Now we get back to what we were doing. Two very important guilds, workers' guilds, also showed us that things had gone from the kitchen in popularity to where they became commercial. Conspicuous consumption came around with this one. The Worshipful Company of Apothecaries was basically what the pharmacist, who the pharmacists went to have their medicines made. But guess what? They also had a water juniper recipe. Huh. Can't imagine how that happened.
The same founders of the apothecaries also created the competitor to the apothecaries.
And the Worshipful Company of Distillers was the commercial side. They were not making medicine. They were making social spirits.
There was a reason that they created this second guild, this livery, and that's because the founders had a monopoly on the base spirit.
Yeah, talk about a captive audience. Here's your manual. Oh, by the way, the spirit that you have has to be a grain spirit. It has to be high proof. Oh, we've got the monopoly for making it. Why not? Speaking of,
This is what set us on this research. During the lockdown, I brought this book to Anastasia from 1639, but it was written in two different codes. It was written in two different codes because it was meant to protect the recipes for only the members.
and even the numbers for the measurements were written in letters, not in numbers. So you had to have the special copy with the handwritten decoding.
But she began deciphering it.
While I was trying to get my thesis done.
You weren't that busy, you were just sitting in front of your computer.
He finds the weirdest times to do things. What can I
But
say?
she managed to decipher it. If anyone is interested, this book is now available on Amazon with all proceeds to industry charity.
Yeah. But anyway, so what we found in here was one recipe for aqua fructum, or water of fruits.
It was one of 3 juniper distillate formulas, but this one contained juniper, citrus, orange and lemon peel, Spices. That is the structure of modern gin. Juniper, citrus, spice.
And it was not made with a wine spirit, it was made with a grain spirit.
And it was made on a spirit. So this is the structure of gin that we make today, and this recipe was published in 1639, 10 years before Geneva supposedly arrived, and then eventually evolved into this.
Can I interject one more thing?
Sure.
Okay. If you want to know the real difference between gin and Geneva, there's a few. The first one is Geneva contains, generally speaking, rye. The criticisms that you'll find in the book from the English about using rye in the making of gin are not to be believed. The other problem is Geneva is made by sticking the botanicals in the spirit rather than rectifying it. They do it as an initial one shot. And that's the other difference. Like saying, oh, Scotch whiskey is the same as bourbon. Geneva and gin have as much in common as Scotch whiskey and bourbon. Think about it.
Now, I said this was a modern gin structure. In one respect, it was even too modern. Right down here at the bottom, after distillation, add strawberries and raspberries. Yes, raspberries at the time was spelled raspberries. Yeah, but so this was a pink strawberry gin in 1639. There's on the next page, which is not here, it said, and dulcified to taste, sweetened to taste. But as former bartenders, we thought, no, I would much rather sweeten when making a drink with it than have it already sweetened.
But at the time, English spirit, all English spirits were sweetened because that was the taste level at the time. And that lasted long enough that there were actually separate laws made up for spirits that were sweetened and contained botanicals, and they were called sweets.
Which was,
I was talking about candy. It was sweets.
I got that one wrong for a bit. I couldn't figure out why Parliament was so concerned with regulating candy. But it was actually alcoholic sweets. So what you got in hand is a taste of that recipe from 1639. They didn't have neutral grain spirit. They had no way to get it to 96%. So I reached out to some friends at Auchentoshan, and I got some of their new make spirit and used that in here. Also, because it would have rested in barrels, it would have been transported in barrels. It would not have been aged, but only a few weeks in barrels. So this has spent 2 weeks, where the first flavors you get from a barrel are the soft caramels and vanillas before the tannins, the sour notes come out. So it just adds that little hint of sweetness to it. But the first time I tried this in a martini, I quickly discovered this is the driest gin I've ever tasted in a martini because it contains no licorice and there was no sugar added after distillation. So I found myself adding a bar spoon of simple syrup to a martini, which I thought I would never do in my life. But also discovered it makes a beautiful old-fashioned. And we've been making with the ginger bitters a garnish of ginger because gin and gingerbread was the first spirits and food pairing we found in history.
Well, we won't even discuss the fact that Willie Schmidt, when he moved to New York, used to serve a bowl of ginger nuts, gingerbread, with his cocktails. And this is something that was also seen in the 1700s and the Frost Fairs in London, where they always served gin and gingerbread. So, you know, it keeps on going, surprisingly. Now, because we're going to cut everything into insanity, what about the gin craze?
You've all heard of gin craze?
Never happened.
It happen.
It did not happen. It was all written up in the newspapers in Gin Lane and Beer Street. But when you look at the actual court records on Bow Street, during the entire alleged gin craze, there were only 1,500 people who were ever arrested.
Well, the tabloids gave the impression that there
Everybody
were
was arrested.
that many people a month. It didn't happen.
It never happened.
It was a bit like Haitians eating cats and dogs in Ohio.
Precisely, it's the same problem. It's like the funny thing is the one thing that they were, that did exist was compounded gin, not the gin that was being made by using a pot still, but people were buying, hold on your horses, they were buying rum from Bristol and not imported from the Caribbean. It was produced in Bristol by 3 major distilleries and then shipped on the Thames to people who were just willing to put some stuff, you know, some turpentine, some grass, some sawdust, anything to make alleged gin. Now that's where your gin craze happened, was people thought that they could make a cheap copycat of a legitimate product. Huh? Yeah.
The two central figures in Gin Lane, I know you've all seen this image before, but this figure, the historians got that one wrong. He's not a pamphlet salesman. There was nothing wrong with pamphlet sales.
Oh no, it's an illegal thing to do.
But in his basket, he's holding a glass balloon. That was gin, the bad gin she was just talking about. Next to it, this little square is gingerbread. He was a gin and gingerbread salesman, which is what you did if you had no other way to make income. You walked the streets selling gin and gingerbread.
Or you wait for a good hanging to happen and start selling it off to everybody who's watching the hanging. Yeah, okay. That always works. And okay, you've also heard about 8 gin acts.
From Parliament.
From Parliament. I've heard this innumerable times. And if you go on to Google, 8 gin acts, guess what? There weren't any. There weren't any. There was no London Dry Gin Act. There was no Gin Act of 1751. These were all laws pertaining to all British spirits. Gin was not the only spirit made in England. So anybody says, oh, this is all about gin, go sit on it. It's the truth. Anyway, so what did change gin into what we know now? It comes down to 2 technological improvements. The fact that the Sites hydrometer could tell you the precise proof, so that you could bring up higher proof in a spirit, was the first part. The second part was the continuous column still, which before Anita's coffee, there were continuous column stills manufactured in France and in Scotland. And it's just that coffee still eventually got the better marketing. But these 2 things together made higher proof, purer spirits, so you have more botanical flavor. Right?
One act of Parliament that did have a major impact on gin was the Act of 27 June 1825. And it said, it's like, no person shall keep a still of less than 400 gallons, or 1,800 liters. So Beefeater was the last distillery, or boroughs at the time, to get a license in London, 1820. When this went through, nobody else got a license for a copper pot still until we challenged that one in 2007. And finally got the first exception to this in 2008. On the basis of that legal work, there's now about 825 newly licensed small
Yeah, but they're all
distillers.
provisional licenses. None of them are straight licenses. The government could change any day now and say, oh no, you can all go away. So they're still not confident that they're willing to let us all produce gin. What can you say?
Oh, but we pay them so much in taxes.
Yes, we do. And that's another important thing to know, is that England's economy since 1643 was supported not by candles, not by wool, but because of the amount of money that was collected on beer and spirits. 60% of the income of the country came from the taxation of beer and spirits. But anyways, so what does this all come down to? First takeaway, juniper distillates that originated in Austria and Germany arrived in England by the 1500s. That's different, isn't it? By the 1630s, a uniquely English formula emerged from the German beginnings, which included juniper, citrus peels, and spices. It was rectified and compounded rather than adding the botanicals into the first distillation, which is what happened in Geneva. While dodgy compounders and spirit sellers produced cheap imitations, real English gin was born in the 1630s, not with William and Mary, not in the 1680s. And English gin evolved because of the invention of hydrometer and this column still, but the recipe bases always remain the same. The trick in our book is rather than just telling you about all these recipes, I published all of them verbatim, so you can see what happened at each stage and each variation, including in the 1800s, where there was more than one style of gin. By the 1860s, there were dozens of styles of gins, and they needed it. So again, is there only one style of gin? Not really. And is that it should be any different now? Not really. But just letting you know, its history repeats itself.
So, one afternoon, Anastasia shouted out in the house, "The book is finished!" as she stood up from her laptop. She looked at me in front of my computer, and I didn't say anything. And she looked. The smile went off her face, and she said, "What?" And I said, "Give me 3 hours, I just thought of something."
It took you 4.
But she let me have it, and I add an appendix to the book that destroys the history of the gin tonic.
Whoops.
So a few quick notes about the gin tonic. Aerated quinine tonic water, born March 1858. This is one of the first ads for modern tonic water. They thought this would replace the brandy and soda as your doctor's recommendation for your daily drink. It did not catch on. Brandy and tonic just didn't work that well. Within 4 years, they were selling in the colonies in Singapore, New Zealand, Australia, India. And within 10 years, it was 1873, we began to see people coming from India and looking for gin tonic that they'd been drinking back home. Was it the English troops, the British troops during the Raj? No, the British troops during the Raj were recruited locally. They weren't British. They were using opium, ganja, hooch, toddy, arak. Those were their intoxicants, not gin. And this was an anti-malarial. Now that was made up by a writer in 1976. Tonic water, even in this ad, was sold as a stomach remedy, a digestive aid.
You never can tell. We're going to find out the truth about some things, I swear. But if you want to know more, the rest of it's in the book. We go on for a while. But I want to thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Anastasia und Jared. Und ihr habt jetzt noch die Möglichkeit, gerne noch ein paar Fragen zu stellen, wenn ihr möchtet. Das Buch ist published right now, right? You can buy it on Amazon. Und we have a few copies here. If you're interested in the book, wenn ihr gerne interessiert seid, dann wendet euch gleich an Anastasia oder Jared. Sie sind noch eine Weile hier. Den Gin, den ihr jetzt probiert habt und auch in dem Old Fashion, ist available in Deutschland ab Ende November. Ab Ende November und wird rein für die Gastronomie und 1, 2 ausgewählte Händler, aber das bleibt eher im kleinen Bereich, soll mehr für die Gastronomie, also für euch da sein. Gerne mal eine Handmeldung, wer noch eine Frage hat. No questions? No questions. There's one. You're welcome.
I have a question. So this you
spirit that you, the new gin that you created with a base spirit that you got from your friends at Okatoshi. How do you get that by the EU legislation that, as far as I know, supposes that a gin can only be made with a completely neutral base spirit?
Maybe something good did come from Brexit.
Good. Dankeschön. Sehr gute Frage. Gibt es noch weitere Fragen?
But I'm only using a small percentage. I tried it 100%, it was too much for a modern palate. And at the end of the day, and frequently in the middle of the day, I also have to drink my products and smile.
Oh yeah, thank you. That was an amazing presentation. Appreciate it. You mentioned the addition of sugar in England was a taste of the English at the time. Is it reasonable to assume that the addition of sugar was to soften what was a quite pokey, harsh spirit at the time, or is that an oversimplification?
No, that's an oversimplification. It comes down to the English had a sweet tooth. The second the sugar was available, they wanted anything and everything. And it really boiled down to that. And when the planters in the Caribbean fought like tooth and nail to make sure that sugar was going to have its hold on the UK, it did. It's as simple as that.
Thanks.
Hat noch jemand eine Frage? Ansonsten? Is there another question? Okay, thank you so much. Yeah? Yes. Genau. Anastasia erinnert mich, wie gesagt, wir haben nachher heute Abend von 19 Uhr bis 22 Uhr ein Takeover in der Küche-Bar. Und wie gesagt, um 17.30 Uhr und um 18.30 Uhr gibt es einen Gourmet-Liner, der vorne vorm Haupteingang steht, mit dem ihr kostenfrei natürlich mit leckeren Tränken versorgt werdet und dann direkt zu unserer Location fahren könnt. Also wenn wir das eine oder andere Gesicht nachher sehen, wir würden uns freuen. Wer Interesse hat, mit diesem Gourmet-Liner heute Abend noch andere Locations zu besuchen, kommt gerne gleich zu mir. Ich habe einen QR-Code, auf dem könnt ihr euch einscannen, dann kommt ihr in eine WhatsApp-Gruppe und dann erfahrt ihr, wann der wo ist. Also, thank you so much. Vielen, vielen Dank und danke an die DBU. Vielen, vielen Dank.